Thank you for joining us today on JM Class E 92.3 FM. My name is Tamjeed, and I will be your host for this program. We have a great podcast prepared for you today, Thursday, October 7th, 2016. Today, we will be discussing aspects of the Vietnam War and the issues American veterans face after coming back home from the war. After the Vietnam War, soldiers came home deeply affected by the traumatic experiences and the personal difficulties that the civilians had no way of feeling. The stress of these experiences separated these respected veterans from the civilians. We will first examine Norman Bowker, a veteran of the Vietnam War, and his personal experience with such a situation. We have personally interviewed him and some that know him best after he returned home, trying our best to understand how he and those who know him best personally felt on this issue. We will then attempt to understand some of the problems and challenges veterans encounter with post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD in depth with our expert Dr. Sanjay Magic from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Later, we will be joined by Tim O'Brien himself to discuss his thoughts on his developing novel, The Things They Carried, and in particular his chapter in the work, Speaking of Courage. Now, we look at the quaint town Bel Air, a town, a lake, the A&W, the workers, the road around the lake. A sort of stillness permanently resides here, located on the Iowa plains. Nothing much really happens here. The town has maintained the calm it had before the war. While to many citizens, they may find the charm of this town to be quite lovely, many soldiers coming home share a different opinion. We will now listen into the conversation we had with those in Bel Air earlier this week. Here is our junior journalist, Elijuh Weaver.
Elijuh Weaver here. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Bel Air. The temperature is a soothing 70 degrees, and the sun is just starting to sink toward the west. Now I am here riding along with Norman Bowker, who recently came home from the war. We were just cruising along, circling the still lake in the center here. We're on the air. Norman, do you want to say hi to your family or maybe to a lovely lady out there?
Well, I could say hi to my dad. Well, no, not really. Sally Kramer, I mean Gustafson. No, well, not really. They wouldn't understand anyway.
So, Norman, I'm sure you are pleased to be back. It must be a wonderful thing to live here in this calm and beautiful place.
Well, don't get me wrong, but the town is really quite nice, and people try to be kind too. Except sometimes people act too nice, too polite, like they're afraid they might ask the wrong question. I mean, I don't know, and I'm not trying to sound like a whiner vet. It just feels weird, man. Like no one wants to hear what I have to say. Like really hear.
No, it's alright. Tell me. I want to know.
Well, it feels like I'm by myself. I've no one to talk to, no one to tell my stories, or what I had to go through in Nam, except you. But it feels like everyone left. My high school buds are all off at university, or married or moved away. But me, I'm still here.
Driving along, we passed 5 workmen preparing the evening's fireworks. None waved. They just stared.
You know, I feel like there's no one to turn to. Maybe Tim, but not my father, not Sally. The town is indifferent. Just keeps on routine. Can't get caught up in all this war drama crap. Was just back in that field. No, you don't want to listen anyway.
Are you sure you don't want to share?
How about I just drive?
We then attempted to contact a close relative of Mr. Bowker, his father. Unfortunately, he declined to respond to our phone calls and turned down our invitation for an interview. We then got a hold of a childhood friend of Mr. Bowker, Sally Gustafson.
Hi, Sally. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. It's a pretty nice day.
Yes, it is. Would you care to explain on how you met your good friend Norman?
Well, we met in high school and have been pretty close since then. We spent a lot of time together driving on this beautiful lake. We often discussed a range of topics that interested us, including what our future might hold. And then Norman got drafted for the Vietnam War. We were both distraught, but we both understood there was nothing we could do to change that he was going to fight in the war. To try to help him keep his mind on home when he missed it, I gave him a picture that he now carries in his wallet.
That's great. I'm sure that helped him out a lot. I understand that you got married while you were gone. How did Norman react to the news when he got home from the war?
That's correct. When Norman left for the war, he knew me as Sally Kramer, but then I got married to my lovely husband. When I had heard Norman was back home from the war, I was excited to share how our little old town had gotten along while he was gone. But I never got the chance because Norman seemed distant from everyone, almost like he was avoiding me. I even saw him one day driving his father's big Chevy when I was mowing the lawn, and it looked like he was about to pull over, but instead he stepped on the gas and sped away. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Norman hasn't talked to me.
So do you think Norman has acted strange since he's gotten home?
Yeah, I would say he's not himself. Things are different now, and it's not just my name. I mean, it's just he went to the war and I didn't. I'm married now, and I can't even imagine the things he experienced. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, thank you for your time and meeting with me.
No problem.
That was Sally Gustafson. Now we continue with Norman Bowker after their extensive drive.
So Norman, how are you adjusting to life back home?
It's been hard, honest. I feel like I'm still stuck in the mud.
Why is that?
It's just nothing seems important. Nothing seems real. From what happened back there to what is here, this isn't the same. I mean, I'm struggling.
Well, do you have a job?
And that's the problem. I can't keep a steady job. I know I really should do better, but it's hard. I see what they do here, and I can't help myself. I just always think back to Alpha Company. It all seems so pointless here. I tried my shot at the local college, but the classes just seem abstract. It just seems so unimportant. Honest, nothing here helps with the real world. I don't know how much I can really take.
Well, thank you for your time in this interview. This is junior journalist Elijuh Weaver, and I'm out.
We would now like to bring in a special guest over the phone, Dr. Sanjay Magic, MD, of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Magic is a specializer in psychological post-traumatic stress disorder. We hope to see if he can give us some insight of how the war affected psychologically Norman Bowker and Vietnam War veterans like him. Welcome, Dr. Magic. Pleasure to have you.
The pleasure is mine.
I hope I'm not interrupting anything in your busy day.
No, of course not.
So glad to hear that. Can you tell us about psychological PTSD? We wish to have an expert's analysis on the issue.
Thank you. So yes, PTSD is a disorder that develops in individuals that have experienced a particularly disturbing, shocking, or dangerous event.
Now, how important is fear as a response?
It is normal for most people to feel fear, to be scared. In fact, these are important and natural responses that help keep us safe from danger. Our body is in tune with our environment, and because of it, we are able to make split-second changes or reactions. For example, we have the fight or flight response. Anyways, what separates an emotionally healthy person and a person with PTSD is that an emotionally healthy person is able to recover from trauma smoothly, whereas a person with PTSD will experience problems long after the actual event.
Now, what are some symptoms associated with PTSD?
Symptoms often reveal themselves as quickly as 3 months. That being said, it's not unheard of to start developing symptoms years after the incident. There's significant variation between how PTSD runs its course for certain people, as recovery times or severity are different for different people. There are a few defining criteria for PTSD, though. To be diagnosed for PTSD, the individual needs to meet all 4 of the following and have them occur at least once a month. They need a symptom of re-experiencing, at least 2 arousal and reactivity symptoms, an avoidance symptom, and at least 2 cognitive and mood symptoms. Re-experiencing symptoms include reliving the trauma, which causes stress, bad dreams, or frightening thoughts. Arousal and reactivity symptoms include being easily startled, being tense, trouble sleeping, or outbursts of anger. Avoidance symptoms include avoidance of certain thoughts, feelings, or places related to the incident. Cognition and mood symptoms include difficulty remembering important details, negative feelings about oneself or the world, feelings of guilt or blame, shame, or the loss of enjoyment in formerly enjoyable activities.
Now, how do all these facts apply to Vietnam veterans?
Well, some of the highest reported suicide rates within any group is coming from Vietnam War veterans, with over 160,000 suicides so far post-war. This can be attributed to a number of risk factors and PTSD, which is true for most veterans of wars. Some risk factors are seeing dead bodies, having little or no social support after a traumatic event, or the feeling of helplessness. And even if someone has social support after an event, these individuals commonly retract themselves from friends and family. Some of the resilience factors, which is what protects veterans from suicide, are seeking out support, being able to cope, learn to feel good about one's actions, and being able to respond effectively to stressful events. So there are many factors that have to be grappled with after the war. And because of the nature of PTSD, it becomes very difficult to do so.
Now, thank you, Dr. Magic, for helping us understand PTSD. We really appreciate it.
Of
We'll be taking a short break in our program, and we hope you stick with us. This is JM Class E 92.3 FM. Welcome back. We're back from a brief break and we'll continue with our program. If you're just joining us today, our story is focused on post traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, and the challenges that veterans face after coming back home from the Vietnam War. We have discussed what PTSD is and how veterans cope and react that have the condition. We also interviewed a veteran of the Vietnam War, Norman Bowker, along with those who have observed how Mr. Bowker has experienced the illness. We are now joined in the studio by another veteran of the Vietnam War, Tim O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien is an acclaimed author whose stories are influenced by his personal experiences from the Vietnam War, and is known for some of his books, If I Die in a Combat Zone, In the Lake of the Woods, and also his 1979 National Book Award winning Going After Cacciata. He is here today to discuss his novel that he is currently writing, The Things They Carried, and in particular the chapter speaking of courage. So, Mr. O'Brien, welcome to the program. It's a true honor. For the sake of simplicity and a better, more personal sense of this interview, do you mind if I call you Tim?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. I don't mind at all. You can call me Tim if you wish.
Now, so Tim, can you tell us what inspired you to start writing this novel and even possibly give us some more insight of what it is about?
Of course, the Vietnam War was a very significant part of my life, and I can't help but to remember what it is like. I remember Nam and the soldiers and the infantries and even everything that was carried for hundreds of what seemed like endless miles. I think I use writing to vent and talk about what I saw and felt in Vietnam. And, can you please repeat the second part of your question?
Certainly. Can you elaborate on what your newest book is about?
Ah, yes. Thank you. The book centers on Vietnam and a platoon of soldiers. In one sense, it's about the Vietnam War, but it's also about storytelling, how stories rule our lives, how they are continually told as we search for the truth.
That's very interesting. So then what is the distinction between truth and accuracy?
Accuracy is what we see with our eyes, which can be very deceptive. We can't see everything. Historians can't capture the thoughts of every single soldier in the war, and I feel like a lot is generalized and not everyone understands what is really felt. That's why I like to write fiction about true events in my stories. In a sense, the fiction makes the reality seem more real.
Now, how did you capture the realism of the war?
That was kind of tricky. I used a lot of literary techniques to help accentuate how it actually felt. The first example of this is the use of jargon that I place throughout my book.
Now, for some of our listeners out there who don't know what jargon is, can you please explain what it is?
Of course, jargon is the use of diction that is applicable to a specific field. For this instance, I use Army terminology like SoP to accomplish the use of jargon. Jargon's use in my novel resonates the appearance that the men and I are really a part of the story and are not fictionally set. I also use colloquialism, which is an informal language that makes the stories more real and personal.
Now, what is another technique that you use?
One technique that is important in my novel is the use of em-dash, a long dash used to separate major thoughts and phrases. Em-dashes are very useful because they are symbolic to the thought processes, making the story seem more like a memoir as intended.
Now, why do some parts of the book seem to jump around?
This also relates to the idea of the book being a memoir and portraying the processes thinking of the past. I use the technique of nonlinear narrative, which is not presenting the events in a chronological order. When we think of the past, we find a general idea of what happened, and we fill in the holes afterwards, much like actual thought processes.
Now, earlier you stated that you used writing to vent about what you saw and felt. Why is that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think I am lucky to be able to write about what I have experienced. That's why I choose to write with fiction as opposed to nonfiction, because it's hard to describe the indescribable. And I feel the only way to do that is with the endless possibilities that fiction presents. Other veterans are not so fortunate. Like myself, they struggle with PTSD, but much more severely. Some veterans I know very well, like Norman Bowker among them. That's what inspired the chapter speaking of courage.
Can you describe your relationship with Mr. Bowker?
Norman was a close friend from our platoon. Alpha Company consisted of many good men. Sure, you could call them honorable, but I call them friends. Bowker and I kept close ties after Nam. He even wrote to me when I was writing Going After Cacciato.
What did you guys discuss?
Well, after the war, he wrote to me a 17-page essay. It was about how he couldn't connect anymore, how life didn't actually mean anything. He lived with his parents who loved him, and he couldn't get a job and couldn't go to school. He didn't really know why. He told me about how Vietnam killed him. He criticized the parades and celebrations of veterans. He read my first book, If I Die in a Combat Zone, and he told me how much it meant to him. But he then told me to write about a soldier who lost himself at the war, and how his friends sunk away in the crap that they had gone through.
Do you think he was talking about himself, the soldier who lost himself?
Yes, I do. This makes me feel pretty guilty about myself, if I'm being honest. I had transitioned from Vietnam almost flawlessly without a struggle, but those like Valker suffered.
Why do you think that you didn't suffer like I did?
Oh, I know why. It was because of my writing, like I said earlier. I had poured each and every thought into words, and I was clearing myself out. The letter, thus, and the suggestion I took to heart, and I started writing Speaking of Courage. After I wrote it, I sent him a draft. I chose to leave out a lot of his suggestions.
How did he receive it?
He said that he liked it, but he was upset about it with me on how I left out details about the soldier's traumatic experience. So I added back a lot of the stuff that I left out. I didn't realize how much this trauma hurt him, especially about his experience of losing a close friend in a terrible way.
What happened next?
I am currently revising and rewriting the chapter as we speak. I hope that he is going to be okay with it, and I hope that it relieves some of the stress.
And this chapter is in your awaited book, The Things They Carried?
Yes, when the book comes out, I hope that it relieves the tensions of Bowker and those like him.
Mr. O'Brien, thank you for your time. We look forward to reading about your experiences and the experiences of your brethren, and those many other good men that have been deeply affected by the war. It was a true pleasure to have you.
I truly appreciate your invite and courtesy. Thank you.
This will conclude our program for today. Don't forget to pick up and read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien out in bookstores in the upcoming months. A special thanks to all our guests for giving their time to be with us today, and a special thanks to listeners like you, whose support keeps stories like this one continue. We hope that you all have enjoyed it and found it insightful. Have a nice day, everyone. We will see you next time on JM Class E 92.3 FM.